Great. So we are going to get started. Our panelists today, we have Stephen Cross, Mike Miles, Donna Bungard, and Abby Kingman. Yes.
Welcome everyone to the accessibility panel. I'm excited to be here. Glad you're here. Having this go virtual is fun for all of us. Hope everyone's enjoying the day and get to see some good things. So our accessibility panel, first, I'm Stephen Cross. I'm the co-host of Talking Drupal, a Drupal podcast. Today, we're not talking about Drupal, we're talking about accessibility. And certainly in today's world, we would all agree that, and literally today's world, that communication for everyone is of the utmost, and accessibility plays a key role in that. So our panel today is going to help us learn how to move ahead with accessibility in your organization and in your development teams. I think we all in our industry certainly have come to the conclusion that, and we know that we need to have our websites be accessible. The question is often how do you do that? How do you get through that pain? So we're going to talk about that today. So joining us, we have Donna Bungard. She's a client lead at Canopy. Donna has her CPA-CC certification from the International Association of Accessibility Professionals and leverages that knowledge in her everyday life at Canopy to help organizations see how accessibility is practical, cost-effective, and can be just what we do as an organization. And with the entire audience able to take in the content, her passion for the written word helps businesses optimize their content to speak, not at, but to their audience. We also have Abby Kingman. Abby is an accessibility specialist. Entering the field of digital accessibility has changed the way Abby looks at everything, studying in preparation for the CPA-CC exam. She came to view accessibility not as a technology topic, but really as a human topic. It's about people, ideas, including everyone, and all their conversations. She seeks opportunities to use the knowledge of WCAG principles to help organizations advance towards achieving their goals. And last, we have Mike Miles. He's the VP of Technology at Genuine. In his day-to-day role as the VP of Technology for digital agency Genuine, Mike leads the team of developers in creating large-scale platforms for clients, a focus of which involves making sure that everything that they create is usable, inclusive, and accessible. Outside of his day-to-day, Mike is the host of a podcast called Developing Up, which is focused on non-technical side of being a developer. He's public speaking and regularly presents at technical conferences around the world. So welcome, panelists.
Hello.
Hey there.
So wave everybody. So we've got a few questions here to start with. I'd like to start with this first question, which is, what role does accessibility play? How has accessibility changed your career and professional life? Let's start there.
All right, well, everyone's quiet, so I'll just start
There we
talking
go.
because, yeah, I can't, nature holds a vacuum. So basically, anyone who's heard me speak knows that growing up, I was the only one in my immediate family, my immediate household without some kind of disability, and we had kind of the wide range. And I kind of always took some of the things I did for granted. Truth be told, it wasn't until about 5 years ago that my sister even mentioned all the things I would do to the way I enunciate when I'm speaking to her, so I know she could read my lips more effectively, things like that. So I took a lot of just what we do, in my household very much for granted. So when I started becoming aware of it on the web, it just seemed this very natural progression of, oh, well, that makes sense, because when you're working with someone who's hard of hearing, or my mother was partially blind, so, oh, wait, so what we did here is the same thing we do there, or my father has only one eye, so you don't go up from the other end to on the left side unless you want to be mean. So it was just these considerations that were always, for me, a part of that. Actually, I kind of helped me become more rounded. And I really got to bring these things into my professional world. And because of that, I'm able to speak to it and speak with empathy and try to really communicate that empathy and bring that forward in strategy and writing and management. And for me, that's pretty exciting.
How about you, Mike?
Yeah, I'd say for me, I mean, it's a number of years ago, I started learning about inclusive design, which is related to accessibility. And the focus of that, is making sure everything you build is as usable, inclusive of as many audiences as possible. And my career in development of myself, I started using that outside of development, making sure the way I introduce myself or the way I approach people and talk to groups, I was being inclusive with it. And then tied into back to the development practices, I brought the same thing into what my team we're building, and making sure we're not planning for that it works for us, but that it works for other people. What the content we were writing wasn't, oriented to any one group of people, but it was as the broadest spectrum as possible. And I think the more you do that, the more second nature it becomes now towards. So far, like when I start to speak to people, I'm very careful about the words I use to make sure I'm not, excluding anybody as much as possible. And same thing when I'm talking to clients, because you never know how they're going to receive something. You never know really what their audience is until you start to open it up to really include everyone, I guess. So it's really changed my thinking and approach conversations and how I approach thinking about who we're building things for.
And you, how about you, Abby? You're muted.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So first, just let me say, if I start breaking up or anything, someone just like wave at me or something. I live in a place where the internet is really primitive, so I was already getting some breakup in Mike's conversation there. So I think discovering the topic of accessibility really had a profound effect on everything for me. Unlike Donna, I wasn't exposed to things, as I was growing up. I wasn't exposed to a lot of different people with different abilities. And now that when I went through the training for the CPACC certification process, it just opened my eyes to a lot of things that I really hadn't thought of before. And it really changed the way I view not only the web, but just everything that I do in life, like with the way I approach a building. Even a friend of mine was recently telling me about her son's MFA exhibition, and she showed me pictures of it. And I said, well, how about that shelf? Would somebody in a wheelchair be able to access that? And like, how would somebody in this way interact with your son's thing? And so I'm just like always thinking about how different people with different limitations or abilities would be able to interact with all kinds of things. So it really just has changed the way I look at everything.
From the agencies that you guys work in, how does accessibility play a role in your pre-project work and your pre-development work? How do you position your teams and the teams you're involved with to prepare for accessibility?
So, at Genuine, since we do the full service for our clients, we really start with strategy. And so strategy team kind of works out the digital platform for our clients. And they start by personas that sort of have accessibility needs and thinking through not just those core users, the ones that our clients might not normally think about. It depends on the client you're working with. If it's, a company that's making money, you can kind of sell and you're reaching more customers. And if it's like a nonprofit, you're spreading your message to more people. So we really start with the personas we're building and the clients, the customers or users we're going after that we want to target. And that's a real place to start, and making sure that the client is definitely on board with that and they understand the value of approaching it from that way.
Donna, in your introduction, you mentioned that you like this to be not like I took the impression, not a deliverable on a project, but just the way we do things.
It is. I actually believe this really needs to be baked in to piggyback on a little bit of what Mike said. He's absolutely right. You have to start with the personas. Cornell University actually has a great tool out there where you can just plug in some demographic information and you can see the percentages of people by the CDC who actually are impacted. So you can really give statistical relevance to what you're building. Additionally, content strategy, everything from reading levels. There's so many Fletch Kincaid testers out there, go ahead, take a look, understand that. When your UX team is looking at things, you know, if you're working, especially with students, my goodness, the percentage of students who are currently being diagnosed with ADD or ADHD, make sure that is a really clear user journey, because they haven't developed necessarily the coping skills to handle all of those distractions. So things like this, it's just baked into every step, into the wireframes, into the design. There's some mega menus that are still not accessible out of the box. So when you're quoting it, if you know that your UX is designing for that, make sure you build the time for your team to make it accessible right into that development process. It's an estimation. It's just a part of every little part we do. It's, you know, we all learned how to develop, so that way we had a good user experience on these. This is an accessibility issue. It just happens to be, instead of something that the CDC takes statistics on, it's something the stock market probably takes statistics on. It's the same idea though. We baked it in already. We can do this again.
The way I've,
Go ahead, Mike.
Add to what she said, the way we've baked that in is, you know, I've always explained it that years ago, especially in web development, we used to, you know, estimate for how much it would cost to test on the site, right? And then we built into our plans, we're just going to build it responsively. We're not going to tell the clients we're doing that. It's just our process. It's the same thing with accessibility. We're not going to sell a line item of making your site accessible. That's just our pattern. That's what we do. And it's going to benefit you out of.
You know, those are really great perspectives, and I think that you folks are both are with firms that are pretty far along on your accessibility journey. It seems like you've pretty much arrived in that place, and I think that it's really hard in an agency that's sort of trying to move in that direction to develop the skill set all the way back to shift it all the way left and get that skill set in place, because I think there's a tendency to want to give ownership of accessibility to one or specific roles. And I think getting everyone in the organization on board with the idea that accessibility really is everyone's job. And it's not, you can't just have a designer come up with a design and figure that the developers are going to be able to make it accessible. You can give the developers a huge nightmare by doing that, and because the client has already fallen in love with this design, and there's really just no way that you're going to turn that into a really usable experience for a broad audience. So I guess I'm sort of curious, just to kind of expand this question a little bit, how have you gone about nurturing and developing that skill set in sort of at every level of your organizations? Because I think it can be hard, because it makes people, if people are going to learn this skill set and develop this skill set, it means they probably can't spend time developing other skills that they might think are more exciting.
I think you just need advocates inside of your group if you're working with a smaller agency or someone that's just getting started. I think you just need to have advocates who are out there and just asking the questions, not necessarily people who are trained, but we all started off learning about this stuff, asking questions. And I think asking, and my favorite PM teacher ever said something about B. Columbo. I don't know if you guys ever remember that old 80s show, but he asked the stupidest questions. Yeah, some of you are laughing. I'm not the only one. Good. He asked the stupidest questions, but because of that, he got to the answers that they needed better. So ask the questions. And you know what? There might not be anything wrong, but at least you checked it out. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, he is. But I think that's a really important thing. And then it's also really, really important for organizations, whether they be an agency, a nonprofit, a corporate entity, whatever, is to make sure we train the content editors. Because at the end of the day, it does not matter how wonderful we build out a site. If somebody just enters a space, even on a required field for that alt text, technically, yeah, it'll be registered as a decorative image. It passes, but really that's not adding value. And keep teaching that empathy to everybody at one stage or another. And as I said, that just has with people asking questions and talking about it.
I also think it's important to remember it's not a, zero. Be like, all right, we're doing accessibility. We're going to do it full steam ahead, right? It's all about making small little progress. So do one thing, like have that, like at Genuine, we have someone, one of our front end developers, Patrick. He is our accessibility advocate. Like he knows it inside and out with everything he does, and he asks those questions like Donna brought up. So it's having those, what is that one little thing you can do on this one project to make it more accessible? And then on the next project with the next client, what's the additional thing you need to slowly build up? Like it takes years to really, to make it a strong practice within your organization. But if you're making little movements, then that's the way to do it. Slow and steady.
So it sounds like I hear you guys saying that you think there would be a position that someone would have in an organization, maybe not their full-time position, that they would be the accessibility czar, the person who is sort of advocating and promoting that. Would you agree with that?
I think there's different approaches. If an organization needs that, to have somebody be accountable for, all right, we need this training for the dev team, we need this training for this, we need this, that, we need to have somebody who can speak to it, to a client, blah, 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 blah. If your organization needs that, that's great. If not, frankly, whoever's on the front line with your clients, for us, it's a lot of our project managers and account managers that are on the front lines. If they're educated, they can just kind of bring it up as a natural part, or your tech leads, natural part of the conversation. This doesn't always have to be accessibility. It can just be, hey, I was looking at your site. I love this. Your brands look great. Your logo is awesome. Why don't we put the sign up form here? By the way, this isn't compliant. That's not compliant. Let's change the verbiage here. How's your cat?
So moving on, what would you say is a common mistake that you see as organizations start into accessibility that you'd like to warn us of not get into or do not do? What are some of those mistakes you see, and how can we avoid them?
Well, just picking up a little bit from the last point, I'm a big fan of the distributed model where everybody has some ownership for accessibility. I think there's a danger if one person is sort of in charge of accessibility. If that person's not in the conversation, then nobody brings it up, and then it just doesn't happen until farther on. So I think that trying to figure out within your organization how to build the accountability so that accessibility is happening in all of the conversations is really critical. And it really gets down to the whole ideation process. And when you start trying to mess with the way people sort of develop their ideas, it can be a little threatening, especially I think for creatives. If you sort of like want to start poking at the way they come up with ideas, that can be a little sensitive, but it really does have to get that deep. It has to get into the way you actually form an idea, that right in that very kernel of the process, there needs to be thinking about more than a person like yourself being at the user end of what you're creating.
I think also, and a big mistake I've seen happen is companies focusing on the accessibility and not the usability. So and this happens with development teams who are really trying to build something accessible. Like there's the Lighthouse tool in Chrome that you can run and get an accessibility score. You can get 100 on that. Doesn't mean the site is actually usable by a human person who has, accessibility needs. So really understanding how usability plays a part as well, and making sure that what you're building is not only, great, it's technically accessible, but it's also usable. That's the mistake I see, is you focus on that technical piece and not the usability piece. And to get through that is having, users test it, user testing, even if it's the client stakeholders doing it. Or like we've worked with Perkins to test our websites for us, the School for the Blind, and that they send back reports and say, great, we weren't able to use it for these reasons, fix these things. And that's a really important piece, to just make sure it's usable.
Yeah, I think there's a common sense factor with that as well, to build off that usability aspect. Like, for example, one of my biggest pet peeves is, I do some screen reader testing as part of it, and I'm nowhere near a native user, but if I can navigate it, somebody who actually knows what they're doing better should be able to too. So I'm doing the screen reader testing, and it was a blog article, and they had the social shares because of the way it was floating, read before the blog. And if I were somebody who was only using my keyboard or a non-sighted user, I would have to navigate backwards to find that social share, which I don't know if users necessarily would do. So understanding the user journey and keeping that strategic mindset as you're looking at that usability. I mean, at the end our companies, our organizations that we're building for need conversions. They need their metrics. They need that strategic KPI checked. So keeping that process in mind when you're looking at these usability and these accessibility issues is another key factor, in my opinion.
I think part of that is following, making sure what you build is semantically laid out. If you're not using semantic markup, then it doesn't read on a screen reader correctly. And part of that goes into how you're trying to achieve the design or the UX, making sure that your developers are not misusing HTML tags to accomplish it.
Yeah, in truth, and the example I'm saying is about 4 years old at this point, so it's probably not really a point, but it still sticks out of my mind as a good learning opportunity.
I've definitely been in conversations where somebody has tried to argue that, well, if we did this, then we would we would be able to pass this checkpoint if we made this change, or is it really technically a violation of this checkpoint because of this? And I'm like, okay, we can niggle over points around WCAG checkpoints, but it's a crappy user experience. So that's where I feel like getting that empathy in there is really important.
So Mike, you mentioned working with Perkins. Is that a university, a school? And how did you establish that relationship with an organization to test for you and work with you? Because, Abby mentioned earlier, like, what is a way to get a team excited? Like, one way I could see that being is working with people with disabilities so you can see how your work actually affects them directly. And I'm wondering if working with an organization like that is a way to help get a team excited. Muted. Mike, you're muted.
All right, there we go. It's Perkins, so Perkins.org, and one of the, it's a very well-known school for the blind, and they also offer accessibility consulting. And so what they allow you to do is, you can work with them, you can hire them, and they will do accessibility audits on your websites, on your applications, and provide you a report. So, they have their students go through and provide that report and do the testing. So we did this, I believe we did it for the Truth Initiative. So truthinitiative.org, the big anti-smoking campaign. We ran their website through Perkins with, I hope that was the right client. Well, regardless, we worked with Perkins with a client, and we ran through, and they came back with things to fix. We fixed them. We sent it back to Perkins. They gave us the green light, saying, "Great, this is good to go." So you hire them. It's just like hiring any outside service or firm. It's just what they specialize in, and they have the students who have the real world disabilities. So they can really do the accurate testing. They know how to use the screen readers, and it's a very powerful resource.
Yeah, we had a similar experience. I had a similar experience working with Carroll Center for the Blind, and having the developers actually see, and actually it made a huge impact to me, because I had written the testing scripts, and there was one step that I felt so terrible that I'd asked them to perform this step on like 3 different pages because it was the same error over and over, and watching somebody actually trying to navigate through this horrible segment over and again was really painful. So just seeing somebody, who is a real user go through these steps and seeing it, suddenly you realize, yeah, a link is a link and a button's a button. Or, it does make a difference if this text doesn't match that text, because this person tries to ask for help and it doesn't match what the sighted person is seeing, and they can't get into the same place. So seeing these real practical examples of things that it's sort of easy to say, well, does it really matter? Yeah, it does matter, and having these experiences really makes that sink in.
I think one other thing that I just kind of want to mention, though, is to not get pigeonholed into visual impairments, mobility, cognitive impairments. All of these other impairments are a huge factor. Someone having a hand tremor, someone is going to have a much different experience, especially on mobile. If Audible, is there captions? Are there captions or transcripts available? Things like that. And then if you're having a hard time, selling it, not acknowledging the SEO value and all those other pieces of it too, but really just don't get pigeonholed into the visual aspect, because there is there's a larger group than that, though that's vitally important as well.
That's what I like about, that's why I really like focusing on inclusive design, because it takes into account, you're planning for, age, race, educational abilities, and those sort of impairment, those sort of differences. It's really about a human-centered approach to what you build for your digital products. And it's borrowed from the real world of, inclusive design for building buildings to be as useful as possible. And the benefits that are for people who have, probably, physical differences, but it'll help people who have those non-physical differences as well, if you take those into account.
So what types of tools in resources would you recommend? Let's start with, what would you say are the go-to tools and resources that you would use for someone trying to implement some accessibility?
I would say that the just real quickly, the easiest one is using the Lighthouse tool in Chrome or in your browser. You open up developer tools, you can run an audit on any site you're visiting to see the accessibility score. It'll tell you the things that you can do to fix it. Again, that's not going to take into account necessarily the usability, but it gives you a quick understanding of what you've currently designed is accessible.
There are so many good tools of that nature available now that will run in the browser. And there's Axe, there's the ARC toolkit, there's the Wave, page analyzer, and there's so many ways for people to be able to do just like the basic analysis of the automated testing. And it's just, it seems like it just shouldn't happen for a lot of those things to come through into QA. And if people know the first thing that you're going to do is run one of those tests on the page, and just do it before they send it to QA. But I think, again, just sort of one of the most important tools, especially for organizations earlier on their journey, is just tools that help you to change your mindset. And I really highly recommend going out on Twitter and following people who have an accessibility focus, and don't just limit yourself to resources that sort of focus on your area of practice. Follow some people who have disabilities, find some blogs. And one of the ones that I really love is one called Veronica with 4 Eyes. It's VERONIIICA. And it's a woman with some visual disabilities who just has a fabulous blog, and it just gives you so much insight onto how people really interact with the whole world. So I would say whatever tools you're using, just don't limit yourself necessarily to researching your own little area of practice.
And then when you're trying to communicate this, I do find the UI of the Wave tool to be something that clients can understand very easily. I also am a real big fan of Funkify. They do have a free version, and basically it's persona based, and it will alter your entire, by the way, if you switch tabs and forget about it, it will still be altering it, your entire browser there to represent. They have Blurry Blanca. They have one that shows what it would be like for dyslexia. And how, frankly, if you ever question why people say don't use all caps, put on the dyslexia one and you'll kind of get a feel for that. But on the dyslexia, they show all these other things, and it helps build empathy. Because in my experience, our stakeholders have to be just as educated as we do, because it is that universal need.
Okay,
Another,
go ahead, Mike.
Stephen, is that there's a great book out there called Inclusive Design Patterns. It's by Hayden Pinkering, and it has techniques and strategies for building accessible, inclusive interfaces, and it's for development teams, for UX designers to really think through when they're trying to think through something they're building. Look that up and see, is there an inclusive pattern to do it? In way to do it. So it's a good resource to have and tool to have in your office, whether that's now your home office, just have a copy of that book. It's relatively inexpensive, and I found.
Well, I almost just said we'll put a link in the show notes. I'm in podcast mode. So, but what we certainly will do after this is I will take some of the tools and the links that in the products and things we've mentioned, and I'll put them in a document and attach them to the session. So any presenters, if you could Slack me some of the things that you've spoken about today, we'll make sure we get them out in a document later. We're going to move on to the Q&A section. We have a couple of questions here online. First, from Lil, what about testing apps for accessibility? Any recommendations?
You know, there are tools out there, but truth be told, I haven't used them recently. I don't have any good recommendations.
I mean, beyond, I mean, certainly you can just, for the visual, you can, on an iPhone, you can use VoiceOver, and that's fairly straightforward. And I have done some work with connecting my phone to my laptop with a cable and using like a program that allows you to essentially view the console. But yeah, that's a little bit of a different kettle of fish.
I would actually just recommend you use the accessibility settings in whatever phone you're using and try to get more than one platform. And you know, I've done that for testing web pages, so I'd assume that it's at least something. Again, I don't know if I can speak too much more to that.
There's also, we've used the Wave web accessibility tool, which is available at wave.webaim.org. So they both have an API to run automated tests, and then they have a browser extension as well. If there's anything you test in browser, you can use that to test. And they have site-wide tools, so that might be a helpful resource.
This is a good time to mention the Department of Homeland Security, believe it or not, has something called Trusted Tester. It's at dhs.gov/trusted-tester. It's a full training course and certification, and has tools that you can do some testing with. It's 85 hours of training online with a certification process at the end. So someone who knows nothing about accessibility and wants to get started, that could be a really good and free way to get started. You come out at the end of this training with a really good understanding of accessibility issues and how to test for them. So you can check that out. Moving to our next question, Cheryl says she's pretty green in this area. Is there anything related to race that impacts inclusive design, such as image selection?
I can take this one. Definitely, you know, image selection is probably the most go-to one, right? If you're dealing with, you want to appeal to, you know, more than just one specific race. But also you think about, usually with race, there is education differences and there are social economic differences. So the way you present content, the way you're writing about content, those all play a part when you think about race. So if you can take into account, you know, the different races of people and what those differences cause in their lives, you can really refocus how you're presenting information to your user base.
Okay, great. I have another question here. This is, Mike mentioned semantics a little while back. How much does semantics inform the screen reader?
Yeah, semantic HTML markup. You can look it up. It's the guidelines on when you should use certain HTML tags and for what reasons. And my understanding is that that really informs screen readers. It also informs all browsers. The way they're going to process the HTML, it's the same way because they're going to follow the semantic guidelines. So if say you're using, you know, like a one tag and you're just using that to style content, the way the screen reader is going to read those are as headers for sections. And if you're not using that purpose, is really going to confuse somebody. I mean, that's my understanding that, yes, they follow semantic.
And that's one of those things that another one piece that plays into someone's marketing budget with SEO optimization. Things like Google weight the importance of keywords as headers. So you might be mistargeting your marketing while you're misdirecting your users.
There's a few more questions. I have one that I wanted to ask is, do you guys have any websites that you could point to that you would say are good examples of accessible sites? And I don't know if you want to point out any examples of websites that you think are very bad examples of accessible websites.
Well, I have two, and I can provide two off the top of my head, but only because a couple years ago at the NetCamp conference, the topic was accessibility, and the keynote speaker was from Perkins, and he took the audience through a couple of websites that are good and bad for accessibility. So surprisingly, a really great one, or maybe not surprisingly, was Bank of America's website. Is really accessible and usable. I mean, they're a bank on everyone's money, right? So they focus on that. And a bad one was the British beer company. Their website seemed like it was not accessible at all. You couldn't even figure out like the store hours or where to find a location. So I don't know how you could. I mean, you could go to the websites and check those out and use a virtual screen reader to see how you can process it.
Actually, that NetCamp presentation Mike's referencing is online, and I'll get you the link after. That video is so worth watching. Guys, it will tell you everything. It will be like moving. And yeah, I remember sitting in the audience and I had to close my eyes because taking it in visually at the rate he was going through and as badly as it was marked out was making me nauseous. It was making me seasick. It was an incredible experience. Highly recommend that.
All right,
I think the BBC has, there are a few sites in Europe that are fabulous. I think the BBC is often cited as a reference, and I think some of the British news agencies also as well. I'm sure there's like a used car website, like Ling's Used Cars, that I think I often see cited as like the worst site on the internet. But anyway, but yeah, I think BBC is probably a good one to go to. And a lot of times I will go to the sites for places that do accessibility advocacy. If I'm trying to like find a good menu, I was like, I wonder if this site has that kind of menu. So yeah, any of the accessibility shops.
The BBC is a good one to mention because they actually publicly let out their like semantic guidelines and their patterns. So any developer can go and find their list of how they're building things and the guidelines they follow for all their BBC websites, and it's a good tool for inclusion.
So panelists, do you stand behind your own company's websites for accessibility?
I do. We just relaunched our website, and a big focus on it was accessibility. So the previous one I would not have, but
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and I think what will be our last question here is, do you think it's still a good idea to sell accessibility as a way to improve SEO?
I think that marketing budgets, that websites are often the responsibility of marketing budgets. And I think that marketing team leaders and marketing stakeholders need to understand the full value of any spend and understand the full ROI and have that KPI understood. So therefore, yes, I think you need to show the usability, you need to show the personas, you need to show the SEO, you need to show the overall, the greater value, the legal, how, especially with 508 compliance. Canada did the, C18, I think, I forget what bill it is, that recently did that. Most of the UK has joined the EU. Both Canada and the UK are all 2.1 AA compliant. All of these, it's internationally based. It's a huge legal issue. You have to understand that point of it. And you need to be able to make it so these, our stakeholders are CMOs a lot of the times. And they're responsible for budgets and for this and for that and for big metrics and big results internally. And they need to show the value as well to their stakeholders. So we're not only empowering our users in terms of the end user, but we're empowering our stakeholders to be able to justify something that might be harder for them to sell internally. Not because people don't care, but because there's only so much budget.
Yeah, I think any hook you need to use to get people on board, is fair game. And you may not be able to sell it using the empathy card, but once you get people in, if you need to use the SEO or whatever, then you can, start to do some additional education, but just whatever it takes to get people in, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I always like to say that, to tell the clients that the user that would benefit the most from implementing accessible designs is Google, right? Because they don't care how your website looks, care, what your marketing campaign is. They care that they can read the content in a way that it can understand and process to then serve up in its results. And so if you are focused on making your content structured in the right way that Google can read it, you're probably going to also make sure that people understand that content. On the flip side of that, Donna brought up some of the legal challenges with not being accessible. And it's always a good hook to say it's cheaper to hire developers than it is to hire lawyers. So, you do it right the first time, then you don't have to spend a lot of money. There's a lot of famous cases about websites that weren't built in an accessible way that then had to pay a lot of money because they were.
All right. Well, it's getting close to wrap time here. So I want to take a moment to thank our panelists, Mike, Donna, and Abby, for joining us today and talking about accessibility a little bit. If someone wanted to reach out to you, Mike, or take a look at your new accessible website, where would people reach out to you?
Well, if you want to see Genuine's accessible website, that's wearegenuine.com. For myself personally, and I haven't run my own site through an accessibility checker in a long time, but it's mike-miles.com. Or you can find me all over the internet with the handle MikeMiles86. So that's at Twitter, probably. You can reach me there, or LinkedIn.
Great, thank you. How about you, Donna?
Yeah, I'm pretty much the Bungard, I think, everywhere. Actually, I'm going to go double check my Twitter because honestly, I never tweet myself. But I'm all over the place. As Donna, the Bungard on Drupal, I think I'm here, yeah, on Twitter as well. Or canopy.com or canopystudios.com. They all work. Come visit us, talk to us. Yeah, reach out to me with anything. I'm also on Slacks. I'm all over the place. I'm easy to find.
Easy to find. Great. Thank you. And how about you, Abby?
Well, I have to step back. I'm not with an agency right now, and I don't have a personal website, but I do want to, it is a great question, but I just think it's also a great opportunity to point out that on a technical standpoint, accessibility is hard. And even people who are working on it really hard and spending a lot of time and resources and effort into doing it right, you may be still able to find a bug here and there. So be kind.
True. Well, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. And Stephen, thank you.
Thank you for having us. Yes, thank you for having this thing, moderating and coordinating all of this. Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yes. Thanks to the organizers for sliding this in. Appreciate it.
Yeah. See you all soon.